yeah, SharePoint, common questions answered is the theme of this month's Lunch and Learn session. So I'm going to jump straight in just so we can keep things moving quickly. I can see we've got a bit of a mixed audience connected this afternoon. So some of you may be fairly familiar with SharePoint. Others might not even know what SharePoint is. And there may be some that fit in between as well. So I'm just going to show 2 slides before we jump into our live demonstration. So if I can just share my screen here, if you just bear with me a second while I do that. Okay, so hopefully you can see this slide here. And we're talking about here, firstly, what is SharePoint? If you're not familiar with what SharePoint is, you've probably heard of OneDrive or Dropbox or Box, Google Drive. There's others as well, like Tresorit and so forth. We wrote a little blog article earlier this month about the differences between SharePoint and OneDrive, and that would also apply to other file sync systems as well. You may want to take a look at that, screenshot the URL there. The benefits of using SharePoint for in your organization are quite considerable. You'll see there in the table a number of benefits that you can take advantage of. And primarily, number one tends to be always file storage. But you can see you can use it also as an intranet site. And there's other things as well. I'm not going to bore you by going through those one by one. I'm sure you can read that for yourself. So what are we going to cover today? What are the questions that we're going to cover, those common questions? So these are the sort of questions we get asked regularly. Firstly, how do I find a SharePoint site? That's a good question. It's not always straightforward. What are document libraries and how can I create them? We'll explain that in a live demonstration. How do I sync a document library to my PC or Mac? AutoSave and previous versions, what some little things to look out for when using those features. And for those more advanced users with us today, we can talk about tagging files or data and using something called enterprise keywords. And hopefully that will whet your appetite for what you can use SharePoint for going forwards as well. So let's jump to our demonstration. So let me just end that there. So hopefully you can see my Windows 11 desktop here. This is where we're going to do our live demonstration. So let's take our first question. We asked, how do I find a SharePoint site? So a SharePoint site is where you would store those files or host your intranet. So a good place to start, actually, bizarrely, would be in Microsoft Outlook. So this computer is configured with a user called John Smith. This is John's inbox, and you'll see he's got his email folders here down the left-hand side. You'll also see a little area here called groups. And typically it's collapsed like it's showing here. And if I expand groups, you'll see here that John is a member of 2 groups called projects and operations. A group is known as a Microsoft 365 group. A group is a collection of things inside Microsoft 365. One of those things is a SharePoint site associated with the group. It could also include a Microsoft team channel to go with that. So John is a member of projects and operations. So there's a clue, first of all, how we can find some SharePoint sites. We can click on those, and what's supposed to happen, and I think there's a problem Microsoft's end at the moment because it's been doing this for a couple of days, you'll see a button on the toolbar that appears here called Files. Typically, you'd be able to click that and go to the SharePoint files. At the moment, these buttons are grayed out. I don't know why. That's the demo gods for us. Okay. We can also, though, from Outlook, if I go back to my inbox, you'll find through the little ellipsis button here, the 3 dots, a button called Browse Groups. So in here's another way we can find our SharePoint sites. So if I just make that a little bit bigger and I click on All, this will show me all of the groups where there's very likely to be a site associated with. So we can see we've got a number of groups here: all company, finance team, operations, projects, and projects test. So operations and projects we saw under groups, and we can see operations and projects here as well. And again, there's a little issue with Outlook at the moment stopping this from working, but typically you can click the view button and it will take you to that SharePoint site. You can also see a button here called joined. That means that John, in this instance, is a member of this group. He's already joined. These are private groups. However, you can also have something called a public group. And a public group is open to anybody in your organization. So here's a bad example of one we created for the demo called Finance Team. You would never want this to be public, but you'll see there is a join button. So this is a public group that anyone in the organization can see. When we use the term public, it doesn't mean public to the internet. It's purely users inside your Microsoft environment. Okay, let's close that. And let's look online. How else can we find a SharePoint site? So in my browser here, Edge, I've visited office.com. I've signed in as John. Typically, if you're using Edge and you're set up properly, then it should automatically sign you in. We can see John's initials in the top right here. And if I click on my app picker, you'll notice here one of the apps is SharePoint. If I click on SharePoint here, this takes me to the SharePoint sort of sites landing page. And this is another area where you can find SharePoint sites. So SharePoint has surfaced a couple of frequent sites that I have visited recently. You'll notice I also have what are called following as well. So you can star sites that you visit regularly or want to follow, and they will appear here in your following list. And there's also a recent list as well. Your admin can also feature sites for you as well. There is also a search box. So if I want to look for the finance team, for example, I can click into search. If I type finance, it has picked up a result here. But if I just go show more results, let's say the suggestions wasn't available. If I click on sites, this filters down the search results to the sites that are available to us. So another way that you can find SharePoint sites. The final way is if you cannot find it using Outlook and you cannot find it using the SharePoint URL here, then talk to your SharePoint admin and they will be able to give you the URL to access that site so long as you are a member or an owner of that site. Okay, the next question was, what are document libraries and how to create them? Well, let's jump into a site. Let's go back to my SharePoint landing page here. I'm going to jump into operations. Now, this is a SharePoint site. And within here, on the left-hand side navigation here, you'll see there is a link here called Documents. Whenever you create a new group or which includes a new site, you always get a document library called Documents. You can rename that. If I click on Documents, this takes us into the document library, and you'll see we've already got some folders in here which contain some files. Now, if this Microsoft site or group is also Microsoft Teams enabled, you'll see the little Teams icon next to the name up there as well. And that's quite relevant because it means you can access some of these folders in the document library from within Teams. So if we want to create a new document library within this site, and you want that for the purpose of sort of structuring data in such a way either to make it more secure or more easily to navigate, that's quite easy to do. From the home page of your SharePoint site, there is a button marked New, and you can click on the New button here and create a new document library. Let's click that now. We get asked for a name, so that this is operations. Maybe let's call this document library processes. And we can give it a description if we want, and we can choose if we want it to appear in the site navigation on the left-hand side. Let's click Create. We now have documents, and further down we have processes. If you want to reorder these things, you can click Edit, and then you can drag these things up wherever you want them to go. Let's click Save, and now processes and documents are next to each other. Processes is empty. There are no documents in here. We can start to upload or create new documents in here as well. If I flick back to documents, you'll see there's my documents that sit inside the document library called Documents. Another way to create a document library is through something called Site Contents. You can access that from here on the navigation or from the little settings button in the top right corner. If I click on Site Contents, this gives you an overview of all of the libraries and other assets within the SharePoint site, because it can host your intranet site. There could be web pages and other things as well. So from here, we can also click New, and we can create a document library from here as well. Okay, our next question was, how do we sync a document library to our PC or to our Mac? So the first prerequisite to that is making sure you've got OneDrive installed and logged in. So if you're using a Windows PC like we are here, you'll notice in the bottom right corner is a little blue cloud. If you can't see that blue cloud, just click on the little arrow and it may appear here in the hidden icons, and you can drag an icon down to the visible area. Now my blue cloud is looking good. It says everything's up to date. That means I'm signed in. If it has a line through it or a cross, then it may need some attention. It may need signing in. If I click on it, you see here that we are all synced. And if I click on the settings button and go to settings, click on account, you'll see here we're signed in as John, and we are currently syncing John's OneDrive. Now, if I want to sync a SharePoint site to my computer, it's very simple. Back in the document library, let's go to Documents. Try that again. Here we go. If you want to sync the entire document library, you can just hit the sync button. and that will automatically connect this document library to your computer. You can also synchronize a set of subfolders. So for example, if I only want to sync the meetings folder, I can go into meetings, and any files or folders that are in here, I can now click sync here, and it says this site's trying to open Microsoft OneDrive. We just click open. It's safe to do that. That's connected this subfolder of this document library to OneDrive. Now, what does that look like? Well, firstly, if I go into the settings of OneDrive, you'll notice now we are now syncing operations meetings folder, and that was the name of our folder there. So we can stop the sync if we want to, or that's fine. We chose to do that. If I now open File Explorer to see what that actually looks like, you'll notice here under the company name Extreme Training, which is our tenant name, we've got operations meetings. And there are the files that we have just synchronized. I can work on these files live here or online, and they'll stay in constant sync with my PC. The same applies to Mac. You'll see the OneDrive icon up on the top taskbar where your clock and date is. If you ever want to stop syncing a site, there's a couple of little gotchas to be aware of. Firstly, you want to, first of all, make sure that everything is fully synchronized before you actually stop syncing. There may be documents that are showing an error in the status column here that you want to make sure you resolve those problems before you stop sync. Then when you're finished and you're ready to stop synchronizing, you just literally in the OneDrive settings here under account, hit stop sync and confirm that. It's now stopped, and we now got an error. Now these files now no longer exist. So if I just browse my C drive, go into users, John, and go into Extreme Training, which is basically SharePoint, you'll see here the meetings folder still exists, but didn't we stop the sync? But you'll notice it's now empty. Any files that had been synced to your machine because you'd opened them may still be here. So what you're looking for, just before you delete anything from here, just make sure that if I go to my OneDrive, you'll notice, like for instance here, we've got some icons under status. If you still see any status type icons in files that are being synced from SharePoint, do not delete them thinking you've stopped sync. Reach out for some help. You could end up deleting content from the live SharePoint environment, which will affect other people. To just be aware of that whenever you stop sync. Okay. AutoSave, which is all related to this. Let's resync this folder here, and we'll just go back through that process again. Okay. So now if I go back into Extreme Training, operations and meetings, my files are still here. Let me open up my agenda file here for February 23. So when you open a document now that are syncing from SharePoint through File Explorer, you'll notice that there is a feature up here called AutoSave. And by default, so long as it's a modern Office file, not an old style one, that will be on by default. Okay. As you make changes in this document now, these changes are being synchronized in real time. You'll see it says saving up here back to SharePoint. So we've just added here test 1, 2, 3. If I jump back to SharePoint, and if I open up that particular file, hopefully if everything's all working as it should be, you'll see my live version of the file in Word Online also reads test 1, 2, 3. You'll notice the little red marker there, John Smith. That's telling me that John is editing this file at the moment, even though we're logged in as John here. That's because it's open in Word. The same would apply for Excel and PowerPoint. So the benefit of the autosave feature is severalfold. Firstly, it means as you type, change or make changes to a document, they're being synced in relative real time back to SharePoint. The other feature is it allows additional users to be accessing or editing the same file at the same time, and you will see their cursor position or what cell they're in or what slide they're in the document here through a little a marker here. You can see one here, John saying here in Word, John Smith is accessing it online. So you can actually work at the same time. If you're using other file sync tools like Dropbox and Box and Google Drive, they don't work quite as well when you've got multiple users. Dropbox, for example, will only sort of let you open the file read-only. If you've got a file server, it might even block you from accessing the file until the other person closes it. This is true collaborative working. Okay, so you can open files at the same time, so long as you see that autosave is on. Now, here's the gotcha. We've got here it says May. This is our February agenda. Now, let's say I actually wanted to use this as a template for my May agenda for the sales team. Well, the temptation might be, well, I'll just come in here and I'll edit this to read May, and I'll put in here the agenda points that I want, and so forth. The problem is our autosave function is writing this back immediately to the February file. So all of a sudden we've broken the original file. So when creating a new document based on an existing one, you have two options. Number one absolutely should be this one: use Office templates. So templates are documents that you've created in advance. You save them as a template. So it could be an agenda template, a minute template, a process template, whatever it might be. And then whenever you want to create a new document based on that template, you would open the template, which would create a new blank document with the pre-configured text or cells or whatever in there. Use templates. Absolutely. It's very easy to create a template. Create your document, go File, save a copy, and then under the types here, you've got Word document, docx. You'll have also got Word template, a .x. Same applies to Excel and PowerPoint, and also Outlook email messages as well. Now these, when you choose a template, it will save to your local computer, but you can save your templates to SharePoint for others to use as well. That's number one. If you don't want to go through the pain of creating templates, that's fine. Then the best way to handle this situation, if I go back to my File Explorer, let me just close Microsoft Word here. The best way to deal with that is take a copy of your February agenda before you make changes for May, if that makes sense. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to copy. This is Windows 11. If you're using Windows 10, it will look more like this. So we're going to go copy. We're going to go paste. So let's do that here. We've now got a copy. I'm going to press F2, which is the same as right-clicking and choosing rename. And let's call this the 2305 sales team agenda. Now I can make changes to this file without damaging the February one. Now, let's say we talked about autosave. We said we talked about previous versions. I've broken the February document. How do I get that back now to read February 23? Okay, because I actually edited this accidentally. Well, that's where previous versions comes in. And you can access previous versions two ways. You can, up the top here, it says last modified 2 minutes ago. You can click there and choose version history. And on the right-hand side here, you'll see there are previous versions that have been created. So I can roll back to a version that was created yesterday at 1930, like so. And that does read February, and I can then restore that, which will basically, okay, it's telling me someone's using it at the moment, but that would typically overwrite the 2302 with this older version. The other way I can do that, if I just close all these and that, I can do it from SharePoint Online. So I can take my 2302 agenda, I can click the three dots, the ellipsis, I can go version history, and from here you can see the previous versions. Let's roll back to my one from yesterday. So let's do that now. I can restore that, and that will become the current version. Okay, and that's because it thinks I'm still editing it. Maybe because I've got OneDrive open here. That's how you access previous versions and the autosave feature. Now, the final sort of bonus thing I want to talk about before we wrap up our Lunch and Learn session is more of an advanced topic, and it's around using tagging keywords or enterprise keywords. What do we mean by that? Well, let's take, this is a good example, this particular folder here. We've got some agendas and we've got some minutes. Now, this list will grow if I keep filing things like this, and it might become quite unwieldy to find things. I can use the search function, but I only want to see the minutes, for example. So how do I do that? Well, a quick way to do that would be to use the tagging feature. And it's very simple to use. When you're in a document library, you see add column. Let's click add column, and we can create a number of different types of tag or keywords. They can be text-based, they can be a choice, they can be a date and time, a person, a yes or a no, a hyperlink, and so on. There's also something called managed metadata. We'll look at that in a second. Let's just create a simple choice. So I'm going to scroll up here, choose choice, next, and I can create a series of choices here. So let's call this here meeting doc type, for instance. This could be the name of our column. And I'm going to make it a choice. So choice one is going to be, it can be an agenda. Choice two can be minutes. Okay, and we're going to get rid of choice three to keep it simple. And I can now save that. You can see there's some other options as well. So we've created the column. The column's got a name here, and it's called, when it shows here, once our little message disappears. Come on, go away. All right, let's skip. I'm going to change this document here. It's an agenda. So I'm going to click on this document and this document and this document and this document. And you'll see here, there's the meeting doc type column. I'm going to click the little I. You can do this for one file at a time. And I'm going to bulk edit this. And because we've got that column showing, we can now change these to be agendas. Save. Okay, and let's close that. If I do the same for the minutes, let's just select those, like so. And I'm going to click on the I, which is the properties, meeting doc type. I'm going to make those minutes and then save. Okay, so for some reason, my agenda ones didn't save. So let's just do those once more. We'll change those now to agendas. Right, hopefully that's definitely saved this time. And it's not, if I'm going to refresh my screen. Okay, all right, mostly done. This is how live demos always go. We now have these documents tagged here, and you can have multiple tags if you use the enterprise keywords. What I can use now is the filter view. So if I open up the filter, because we have an extra column showing, we can filter on just minutes or agendas. So if I click on minutes here and then close my filter, I'm only seeing the minutes. So you can imagine if you have a folder with hundreds of files in, this can be a really great way of making things more visual, more searchable, more findable. Now, if I go to add column here, show or hide columns, for bigger organizations, you may want some control over how documents are tagged and stored. Let's show or hide columns, and we're going to enable something here. Actually, we need to turn it on, sorry. We need to turn it on in the library settings. So if I go back to documents, click settings, click library settings, more library settings. There's a feature here behind the scenes, enterprise metadata and keywords. Let's go into here and turn that on and click OK. Now, visually, if I go back to documents, nothing's changed. If I add a column and now go show or hide columns, I can now tick the enterprise keywords and apply. Okay, in fact, what I'm going to do is for the purpose of our demo, I'm going to hide this particular column here. So if I show or hide columns, turn off the meeting doc type. Okay, so we've now got enterprise keywords. If I go back into, let's go into processes. So we've got some different processes here, and a couple of these documents, this is related to answering the telephone, for example. Now, what I can do here, I can click the I next to the file, so I can select it and choose I, or I can click on the ellipsis and choose details. It does the same thing. And down here, you've got the enterprise keywords. In here, rather than having like a choice like we had a minute ago, you can freestyle create your keywords or populate with existing ones. So I'm going to tag this with two keywords. It's a process, like so, and I'm going to tag it with telephone. Now, telephone's already in my database of enterprise keywords, so I'm just going to choose that. Okay, and now what you have to do is you have to press enter, and that saves that. And what we'll find now, if I close the properties, that document now has been tagged with the keywords processes and telephone. Now, these are stored centrally in the SharePoint Administration Center, and your SharePoint admin can add and manage these keywords for you. These will apply across the board, across any library, any site, any group in your organization. So that's covered quite a bit there, and I'm not sure, I think we've gone over just by a couple of minutes on time. Let me stop my screen share. I really hope you enjoyed that really fast whistle-stop tour of some SharePoint features. The recording of this will be made available in our May email newsletter, which you'll get at the very beginning of May, and you'll be able to share that with your colleagues or watch it again if you want to refresh your memory of some of the things that we've covered. Next month's topic is all going to be about Microsoft Loop. And if you've never heard of Microsoft Loop, I'll give you a bit of a teaser. It's a collaboration tool that's very modern to use, very drag and drop, very visual, and really, really powerful. And there's some logic and AI in there as well you can use. So next month, we're going to spend 20 minutes going over Microsoft Loop. There'll also be some information about that in our email newsletter as well. So hopefully you enjoyed today's Lunch and Learn. We really appreciate you taking the time to enjoy, and please have a great May 23.